Welcome to day 2. What's for dinner? We're going to talk about food chains and food webs today. All right, so first, remember that you had some vocabulary that you needed to complete. There were 18 words or phrases that you wanted to define. So if you have that vocabulary in front of you, you can use it, and you'll go into Schoology to look at the What's for Dinner Day 2 vocabulary warm-up assignment. And then we'll talk about the answers to that assignment in just a moment. So if you want to pause the video, go in, complete those slides that are in Schoology, and then come back to this video so that you can see how you did. All right, so some other reminders. Our ecosystem packets need to be turned in on October 30 or October 31, depending on whether you are in odd classes or even classes. Make sure when you're ready to turn that in that you attach the watershed walk page to the packet. Okay, all right, let's take a quick look at our figures on here. And you can see that we have a food chain, just a linear chain happening here from a plant to some herbivore, to a carnivore, to another carnivore, to yet another carnivore. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is that when we're looking at this chain, it's just one path of energy, so it's one way that energy is going to move from a producer all the way ultimately to our apex predator probably. The plant or the producer is always going to be first in our food chain. So the plant that we're talking about here is our producer, and then the guy who eats the plant is the primary consumer. He's the first thing to eat the plant. If I have this mouse eat that bug, the mouse is also a consumer, but because he's eating a primary consumer who already ate a producer, that mouse is now a secondary consumer. So we start with producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. Well, then I have this snake that's nice and hungry, and the snake is going to eat that mouse. So the snake is also a consumer, but the snake is a third level of consumer. So we're going to call him a tertiary consumer. And then we can move up and we can call our next consumer a quaternary. Although tertiary and quaternary, they're just fun words, but we're not going to require you to know those for this class. All right, so a food chain is one single path of energy. And a food web shows how the energy moves throughout the whole ecosystem. All right. Whenever you're looking at the arrows in a food chain or a food web, they always show how the energy is moving. So we started with energy in the plant. It moved to that grasshopper or whatever that is because the grasshopper ate it. So we're showing that the energy went from the plant to the grasshopper, and then it went from the grasshopper to the mouse, and so on. All right. So today's lessons, we're going to actually do our last water quality indicator measurements for the ecosystems. And then we're also going to talk about how food webs and food chains show the flow of energy in an ecosystem. We're going to do that by creating food chains and food webs that exist in Yellowstone National Park, because we want to understand the important role each biotic factor has in an ecosystem. So each of the living things in our ecosystem has a role, and if you remember from your vocabulary, that role is called its niche. And we are thinking specifically about the biotic factors in Yellowstone National Park. All right, so if you went through and did your warm-up in Schoology, you would have worked on a slide like this. So you want to make sure your slides are accurate, because that's something you can use to study for an upcoming test. So if I look right here at this antelope guy, that's just one organism, a single organism of a species. This, I can see I have several antelopes. So this is a population. It's a group of organisms of the same species that are all living in the same environment. Over here, you can see that I have an antelope and some zebras and whatever those are, and a vulture and some lions. So those might be hyenas, I'm not sure. So if I click on this, Since I have multiple species, this is now called a community. A community is many different populations of plants and animals in the same community, in the same environment or ecosystem. And then our last picture, you can see this is an ecosystem. So we are thinking about an area where we have the biotic and abiotic factors that are interacting with each other. So we've talked a lot about ecosystems in our past couple of labs too. All right, so more slides that you had on your warm-up. These are basically using the definitions from your definition homework. It's just that this information is presented a little bit differently and with more pictures, so more visual representation. So food chain is going to be a linear movement of energy flowing through the system. And so I realize this is not a straight line, but we have energy from the sun going to the plant, energy from the plant going to the chameleon, energy from the chameleon going to the mouse, and energy from the mouse going to the snake. So a food chain is a diagram that just shows one way that energy flows through an ecosystem. A food web, on the other hand, is a diagram that shows all the different ways that energy is passed through an ecosystem. So you can see that the rabbit is getting energy from the carrot and also from the grasses. You can also see grasses are giving energy to the rabbit and also to the grasshopper. So we have energy going in different directions. Finally, our energy pyramid is a diagram that shows the amount of energy available at each feeding level of that ecosystem. So if my bottom level is all of those producers, there's a lot of energy available. The producers are getting their energy from the sun and producing glucose. They're producing their own foods. And then we have our primary consumers eating those producers. There's less energy for the primary consumers. Then I have secondary consumers. There's even less energy now that we have primary consumers that we are eating. And then we have our apex predator, and there's the very least amount of energy up at the top. So the most energy exists down at the level of those producers. All right, cooperation is a word that you remember from kindergarten. Cooperation means things are working together to get something done. And so when organisms work together so that all are helped, that interaction is called cooperation. So in this case, the ants are helping to get from one place to another. They are cooperating. We might have several lions working together to take down an antelope. So they are cooperating with each other so that all are helped because they all take down that antelope and then they all eat. Competition is a struggle or a fight between two organisms for the same resource. And it can be the exact same resource. In this case, they're fighting over a bug probably. Or it can be in general, if we are thinking about maybe bison and elk trying to eat grass in the same ecosystem. In that case, we have two different species even competing for one type of food. So it's just competition for food or space or something like that, some other resource. Okay, and then we have our predator-prey relationship or interaction. That's when one organism eats another to obtain or get energy. So in this case, the predator is that fox. It has eaten the hare, which was the prey. All right. A producer, again, is an organism that produces its own food from the sun, like grass or seaweed. And it's always going to be the beginning of our food chain and our food web. We're always going to show that we have a producer in our food chain or food web that is getting its energy from the sun. And then we have consumers. Consumers eat other organisms for food, whether they are eating plants or animals. And so we have an example of a grizzly bear or a bald eagle. They're both going to eat things for food. They can be herbivores or carnivores or omnivores, or they can be scavengers. A scavenger is going to scavenge dead things, generally dead animals. But because the scavenger is eating and using those nutrients for itself, it's considered a consumer. And I say that because when we look at decomposers, those are things like earthworms and bacteria, fungi, mushrooms. All of those decomposers break down dead matter and they return the nutrients back into the environment. All right. So during class today, we had our last day of water quality indicator testing, and these were the roles. If you missed class, you want to make sure that you get this, the data from table mates so that you can fill in the last day's worth of data in your packet. Okay, and we spent about 9 or 10 minutes on that. And I reminded everybody that we have ecosystem packets due on either Monday the 30th or Tuesday the 31st. And don't forget to put your watershed walk paper on your packet. Also, this is important, the earliest that we would test for what's for dinner is October 30 and October 31. Although I anticipate that it will actually be later than that, just know October 30, October 31, there's a small possibility that we will be ready to test about what's for dinner on those days. All right, so our portrait of a graduate skill that we're using today is collaboration. And everybody's going to work with their table mates to accomplish a task. What does that actually look like? It looks like everybody participating to accomplish the task, not just one person doing the task and bossing everyone else around, or one person doing the task while other people read books or work on other homework. So you're going to work together to talk about the task at hand and make sure that you're working to come up with a group answer. Before we quite work with everybody, in the What's for Dinner package, on the back side of the first page, look for this diagram and for this paragraph. You're going to read your paragraph and make 2 annotations, and then we'll continue on. So I gave everybody 2 minutes for this. Directions and responses. Feeding interactions. After studying an environment, scientists may observe patterns in the way that living things interact. For example, they may observe that owls eat lots of mice and that mice eat seeds and insects. Scientists use models, such as diagrams, to show the feeding relationships among the living things. These relationships can be shown as a single chain or as a web that provides a more complex picture. Note that arrows point in the direction of the movement of matter and energy in the system. So I have lettuce with an arrow pointing to the rabbit. The energy that the lettuce created, because it was in the sun, the energy is moving to that rabbit. If this hawk eats the rabbit, the energy in the rabbit is moving to the hawk. Okay, and so again, we want to look at the arrows. What does each arrow show? It shows the direction that energy is moving. So it's moving from the grasses to whatever creature that is, and from whatever creature that is to the fox. It's moving from the grasses to the antelope. Sorry, went too fast. Okay, so in your packet, if you look at step 1 and step 2 here, you're going to get some food web cards if you're in the classroom. Otherwise, I'll click on and I'll show you what those food web cards look like. I asked everybody to put all 12 cards out on the table and try to group them by their shared characteristics. And then we talked about how people made decisions about how to group their organisms. So then, once they had done that, I asked everybody to choose 3 cards because each organism was on a separate card and make a simple food chain and then write the food chain on your paper here at step 3. Okay, so food chain using the cards. Let me get to the cards so you can see what I'm talking about. Cards included things like grasses and a hare and a coyote, or a wolf. So grasses are eaten by rabbits. So we know grass energy goes to the rabbit, and then the rabbit is eaten by the coyote or the wolf, and that's the direction of the energy. So you can see direction of energy on that arrow. After we talked about many different options for food chains with only 3 links, we decided we were going to label the niche or the role of each one of the organisms that you wrote on step 3. So in this case, the grasses, they were producers. That hare was a primary consumer, And then we had a secondary consumer eating the primary consumer. There were many options, though. You'll see in a moment when I show you all the cards. What does each arrow show? It shows the direction that energy is moving. Don't forget, it's showing the direction the energy is moving. So the energy goes from the grasses to the antelope because the antelope eats the grass. All right. And so after everybody made 3 organism food chains, then we tried to arrange all 12 cards on the whiteboard, and we used dry erase markers to draw arrows between those organisms. So we spent a fair bit of time because tables were working on that together. Here are all the cards that we used. And so we have a winter tick and a grizzly bear, a beaver, a bison, a coyote, a snowshoe hare, elk, which I might have been calling it an antelope, I'm not sure, cowbird. We have the aspen trees, the grasses, the pine seeds, and a gray willow plant. So those were our organisms. And so as you make your food web, you know that elk are going to eat grasses, or they might be eating these gray willow plants. You know that the coyote might be eating the elk. And a tick might get its energy from the elk just by feeding on the blood of the elk. A cowbird is going to eat some pine seeds, so energy goes from the pine seeds to the cowbirds. And so if we break all of these cards of representing organisms out, we can have a pretty complicated food web. We have grasses, or these are aspen trees, going to the beaver, also going to the hare, and we have our grasses going to the bison, and also the grasses are going to go over here to the elk. So you can look through this food web for a little bit and make sure you feel like you see that the arrows are showing that the energy is going from the bison to the tick, because the tick is eating the blood of the bison. The energy is going from these seeds to the elk, or it's going from these seeds to the cowbird. I had students kind of look around at other food webs just to see how people had organized things, and then talk about similarities and differences. And so one of the things people realized is probably it's easiest to put all those producers at the bottom instead of having them mixed and matched all throughout the table. And so when you have your producers at the bottom, sometimes it just automatically is easy to have your primary consumers on the next level, but sometimes we might not do that. For the most part, this is what we have. Primary consumers are on our next level, and then secondary or more consumers are on the level after that. So much to know when we're talking about our food webs and our ecosystems. And so remember, we have learned that the wolf was eradicated. It was taken away from Yellowstone. There were no wolves for a while. And then it was brought back. And so the population of wolves is growing. So what happens if we add a wolf to our whole system? Think about all of the food web and where there are going to be changes because now we've added a wolf. And so I asked people to discuss with their groups how the reintroduction of the wolf affected the whole food web. And I asked for 2 or 3 ideas on your paper by step 8. Okay, so if we look at the food web again, we also are going to think about additional things being added. Once you've added your wolf, of course, you are going to have wolves and coyotes competing for smaller animals for food. And that means there might be fewer smaller animals, which might actually mean that there are more producers because our smaller animals aren't living so profusely, and so they might not be able to eat so much of the grasses and seeds and things. All right, so the next thing we talked about was bacteria and decomposers. We need bacteria and decomposers in our ecosystems because that's going to get rid of the dead stuff. Bacteria, in this case, is a decomposer because it's going to eat the secondary consumer. So if we add bacteria to our food web, it is going to get energy from pretty much everything. Anything that dies, that bacteria is going to be getting energy from. And so, or other decomposers as well. So if a grizzly bear dies, the bacteria is going to get energy from that. The pine seeds that didn't get eaten by other creatures, they're going to die and the bacteria will consume them. Okay, coyote dies, we have bacteria consume those coyote. So I also want to show you that we've added cattle to this food web and humans to this food web. Cattle are going to get their energy from grasses, and I don't have an arrow showing that, but grasses send energy to cattle because cattle are eating grass, right? Gray wolf might eat cattle, which we know is part of the reason the ranchers didn't want the gray wolves near them. So energy can go from the cattle to the gray wolf. Energy can go from cattle to humans. And of course, if cattle, gray wolf, coyote, badger, if any of these die, the bacteria will take those nutrients and release them back into the environment. All right, so we put all of our cards away, and then I asked everyone to complete an exit ticket. So if you are absent, please go ahead and complete the exit ticket. And then we mostly ended class. One class was able to watch the rest of a video, but I've included that video in Schoology. If you want to watch the rest of it, it looks like this. Okay, we watched the first about 7.5 minutes in our What's for Dinner Day 1. And What's for Dinner Day 3, if we have not watched it in class already, we're going to watch the rest and we're going to answer some questions about that. So thanks for tuning in, and make sure you get your exit ticket done and have your ecosystem packet ready to turn in.